Hi, Ann.
Hi, Kelly.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm Kelly Wilson with the Wilson team, and today we have a very special guest, probably one of the biggest lifesavers and superheroes that I've had in all of my years of investments. And I thought that it would be very important to bring Ann in because of how I guess how life-changing everything was in an investment that I got involved with about 7 or 8 years ago that we're still actually going through right now. But just for people to sort of understand how a condo corporation works, what is involved in that condo corporation, how as an owner can you protect yourself even if you're looking at buying or you're already in one and there's some rumblings or things that you hear starting to happen. Special assessments. So really understanding what that looks like. And there are two types of property managers. So we have a property manager that when you buy a single unit and you want to be an investor, that property manager can come and help protect that individual unit and work on behalf of the landlord. But then you have a whole other type of property management, which is hiring a property manager to basically oversee an entire condo corporation, right? So all of the units, they don't work for the landlords, they actually work on behalf of the condominium corporation, right? And are hired by the owners. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself. Your company is EOPMG. What does that stand for? Maybe talk a little bit about your background.
Sure. It's Eastern Ontario Property Management Group. We're located in Brockville. And it's a business that it's kind of a second career for my husband and myself. We actually fell into this because we ourselves in the jobs that we had previously were jobs without pensions. So we were trying to have some sort of retirement plan by buying investments. And so we were buying properties, and they happen to be condominiums, and they happen to be located in Eastern Ontario. And about 2 or 3 years into the investments, we had some concerns about how they were being managed and lack of information that we were getting about the units in this condominium. So we decided to, go down, visit them, have a look, and we're actually quite distressed by what we saw and quite distressed about the financial statements that we saw. And my husband got on the board of directors, and when he was on the board of directors, they were all very concerned about the management of the condominium. So the board of directors said one day, what we really need is one of our owners managing, because an owner has a vested interest and they'll make sure it's going well. So my husband puts up his hand and said, oh, we can do that. How hard could it be? So he came home and said, we're going to take over managing. It's not going to be complicated. We just collect condo fees, we pay the bills, and things are fine. Of course, it's not that simple. We eventually, took the courses and became condominium managers. But literally, we fell into this because we had investments in a condominium that was being poorly managed. Went down and looked at it. We're quite concerned. And what happened is, the type of building that we were managing was mostly investors that had bought into it. And we were able to turn the building around and have it, do much better than it had been doing. And some of those investors owned in other condos. And so they started, referring us on to their board of directors, and word spread. And eventually we just started getting more and more phone calls where this stopped being kind of a side job or hobby, and we started taking it seriously about making it a full-time career, and we did that. And now we have 17 employees. We have 5 licensed property managers, condominium managers, and we manage all the way from Aurora outside of Toronto to Cornwall, up to Ottawa and all the little towns in between.
Yeah, and I mean, the way that we met is you were actually managing a building of mine in Kempville, which was it's not a condominium, it was just a multi-unit. Yep. And I showed up on the site one day complaining, kicking and screaming about property that I had owned in Toronto, in Aurora actually. And I was not getting the rents that I thought. I was hearing some very negative things about what was going on the site. And you said, wait a second, who owns this property? How did you get involved in this property? And it actually ended up being the same person, right? That you ended up buying from years before and were suffering the same consequences. So you had a few years on me. And that's what I mean by had it not been for the help of your team and your company, I don't even know where all the investors would be today. But you know, going back to Kempville, we originally bought that building because we thought we wanted to do a condo conversion and sell the units, sort of the same idea as what happened of why we bought into this. Hey, we want to do what they're doing, and we bought this building. So we didn't end up doing the condo conversion, and you probably can share why, especially when there was one up the street, right? That just done it.
Condo conversions can be very, very expensive. So essentially you have to take a building, and your particular building, for example, was an older building. It was a beautiful building. It was an older building. But you know, when you're converting, essentially the owners buying in have to be assured that they're buying something that they're not going to have to sink a lot of money into very soon. So you really have to bring it current in every way possible. You know, down to the foundation, the bricks, the building envelope, the fire system, and so on. And also, if it's an older building, there's a whole concept of reserve funds. And a reserve fund is a fund that every condominium corporation has to have, that they put money aside for taking care of capital projects, big items that will need to be paid for at some point. And when you start off with a brand new condominium and the condominium's a year old, but the building is 100 years old, that means you better have a lot of money sitting in your reserve fund from the get-go, because you're going to be having to put out a lot of money for upkeep. When it's a one-year-old condo and a one-year-old building, you're many years out typically before you have to replace the roof and replace the windows and so on, or deal with foundation issues. But an older building, that's going to happen much sooner. And so you have to start with a lot of money in your reserve fund. And I think on conversions, typically, that is where things have fallen through the cracks in the past. And these developers don't put the appropriate money in the reserve fund. The people buying often are not even aware that a certain amount of money should have been in the reserve fund when they bought it. And 2 or 3 years down the road, all of a sudden they need a new roof, and there's no money in the reserve fund to put the new roof on. And a lot of these owners didn't know it, or received very poor advice from legal counsel when they bought it, because a really good lawyer, when you buy into a condominium, and you know, if they're aware if it's a conversion or not, they should be looking at that reserve fund. They should be looking at the age of the building and going, I don't think there's enough money in here, and I have some concerns. We need to ask some more questions. You know, maybe they've done all their upgrades. Maybe they've replaced all the roofs, all the doors, all the windows, and the asphalt is done, and you have no big project coming up, and thus you don't need a lot of money. And then that's more reassuring. But if you find out that none of that work's been done, and you're sitting there with $100,000 in the reserve fund and you have 200 units, that's a problem.
Yeah, so I'll touch base very quickly, because when you're making an offer on a new property, typically it's around financing. It's also around inspection. And then you have that clause with condominium, which is your status certificate, right?
Correct.
And the status certificate is well, property managers usually create a whole package, right? That includes your Form 15, right? And your bylaws, your status certificate, so everything that's in there, which is supposed to talk about the whole financial wellness of the corporation.
That's right.
And I know that, you know, now I was very naive as a purchaser, and back when I started investing, condos were affordable for me, right? So that's why I loved investing in them, and I didn't have a problem until I had a problem.
Right.
And that problem showed up when I ended up complaining that day, and I knew absolutely nothing about condominiums. I knew I paid the fees, and that is all I knew. So your first question was, well, when's your AGM? And I said, sorry, what?
That's right. You were worried about the health and the financial wellness of your corporation, and I said, well, you would see that in your audited financial statements that you get yearly. And you said, oh, I haven't, seen it. And I said, well, when's your AGM? Because you get that in the AGM package. And you said, what AGM?
Yeah.
And I said, hang on, there should be a yearly owner meeting, an AGM, where you elect your board of directors, you review your minutes, and you look at your audited financial statements. And you said, no, that's never happened. And I said, no, it must have. And you said, no, it has not. And I said, I can't believe that. Now, you had been an investor there 2 or 3 years, I think, at that point, and
3 years, yeah.
no AGM, no audited financials had ever been sent to you in 3 years.
Right.
And that's when I said, Houston, you have a problem.
Yeah. And I said, well, what's the AGM? You said, you never got one of those big fat packages in your mail?
That's right. I said, it would have been a big package in the mail, Kelly.
Yeah, I get them now, but I don't think I ever have. I wonder if they have my right address. And those documents that you get from your condo corporation are extremely valuable and extremely important. And I'm sure lots of people have no idea how to, even properly read it, right? So maybe you can share a little bit about what it looks like in the condo corporation, because it's actually a governed system, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So let me walk you through that. So the best way to think of condominium corporations is as a fourth level of government. You have federal, you have provincial, you have municipal, and condo law is next. We have our own condominium act, and we're very regulated by that. So it's the running of a small community is what you're doing at the end of the day. It's a small government. You have an elected board of directors, and they help oversee the running of it. They direct. Typically, most corporations have a management company. They hire a professional firm. And as of November 2017, there were changes to the act that require that condominium managers now be licensed. So typically, they hire a licensed condominium manager. But there are some condominiums that are self-managed. And for the most part, I think that they move along and they do fairly well. In our experience, when we've taken over self-managed corporations, we typically find that there are some things that they were certainly lacking in and just had no knowledge that they were lacking in some of the things that they should have been doing. That's kind of broad strokes, condominium corporation. The meaning of the word condominium is joint ownership. So if you think about it, the minute you have something that's joint and you have many people involved, you right away got to have it clearly outlined how it's going to run. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems. People wanting to do things that affect others. So in a condominium, the concept is it has to be overseen and managed so that the owner of apartment 1 can't do anything that will impact the value of the owner of apartment 2. So you have to protect everybody's investment. You have to protect how it's run so you are not negatively impacting your neighbor or the value of their unit or their investment. So those are broad strokes, kind of how condominiums are run. When you go to purchase one, you're right. I mean, it's, whether you buy one can be a lifestyle choice. It could be that you're a new homeowner. You don't have a lot of, you don't have a lawnmower, you don't have a snowblower, you don't even want to be doing that. Move into a condo, they'll take care of that for you. It could be, they're less expensive. You can get in, at some reasonably priced condominiums, and that can be your first buy-in for home ownership. As long as you factor in the fact that there'll be condo fees, because those fees cover your snow removal, your landscaping, the replacement of your roof, your windows, your doors. So all of those things are covered. You just pay for it monthly rather than in one lump sum. You also have to be prepared that if there was an unexpected event, an unexpected cost, that they're going to come and ask you for additional funds. Those are, known as special assessments. So in condominium living, you have to be prepared for, your regular fees. You have to be prepared to live within the rules and regulations, the declaration and bylaws of your condominium and the Condominium Act. And you have to be ready to put some money forward if they come asking for it, because it's required to to manage and run the condominium corporation.
Mm-hmm. And so, your bylaws will cover all the details in terms of what to expect, right? I mean, you could do the color of your doors, right? It could be how, what happens if your grass grows too long. It could be air conditioning, units sitting out of the window. So all of these things are covered in the bylaws. So it's really important. It could be pets, like we were talking about in an earlier one, is, no pets over 40 pounds. So it's very, very crucial that you go through the bylaws and understand exactly what is permitted and not allowed within that community, right?
Yeah, typically the way to view them is your declaration is your constitution. It describes who your corporation is. Mm-hmm. Your bylaws are how it's going to be run. It'll often cover things like how many directors you can elect, what their terms of office are, when you have to hold owner meetings, whether you can borrow money, changes to the common elements, how you're able to do that or not do that. So you have various bylaws that are available, but they surround how the corporation is run. Rules govern how people behave. Mm-hmm. So the rules, could be, like you say, they could be about pets. It could be about the color of your curtains. It could be, about the speed that you drive in the garage. It could be about items that you put on your balcony. But it's about how people behave. Noise rules, odor transfer, things that can impact others. So those are things that you have to review very, very carefully before you buy into a community. The pet one is a big one. We've seen a number where, pets were actually banned in the declaration. Mm-hmm. People have moved in, their lawyers did not advise, and they have moved in with pets. And we had to, very regretfully tell them that their pet could not stay. So just make sure that you're scrutinizing that very carefully when you buy in.
A big one now is Airbnbs.
Yeah.
Right. So how, if you don't have anything in your documents that stop that, have you seen people trying to overturn that once the election comes forward, or how hard is it to make a change?
Yeah, it's not that hard. Mm-hmm. Most declarations, believe it or not, have a clause that say these units are to be, occupied by single families only. It's a single family dwelling. If you have that clause in your declaration, typically right there, you're covered from having Airbnbs, because a hotel type of resident is not considered a single family occupation. But if to be sure, it's always advised to have a rule as a backup. Mm-hmm. And that rule should include, length of tenancy. You may have a clause that says you cannot lease a unit for less than 6 months or less than 12 months. You also want to have the definition of a single family. You want to make sure that's included somewhere, because, the question could come up and say, well, what is a single family? You want to make sure you have that in there, and that will cover, any Airbnbs. If you have none of that and you have Airbnbs that are taking place, you should be looking at getting one of those rules put in or change your declaration.
Hmm. So the next one we want to look at is your status certificate. So when you're looking at that and you're making the offer, I always think it's a good idea that a potential owner also reviews that. And how do they know what they're comparing it against, right? So we did talk about a reserve fund study, and how often, basically, what does the reserve fund study cover, and how often should it be done to be able to continue updating? And then how do the condo fees play into that?
Okay, so we got the status certificate question and the reserve fund study question. So first of all, let's explain that when somebody buys into a condominium, mm-hmm. It would be silly not to get a status certificate, but typically your lawyer will advise you get one. And if you have a mortgage, the bank providing the mortgage will require one. Yep. So this is a document, it's a prescribed form. Mm-hmm. So that means don't go messing with it, don't go changing it, because we see it all the time where they have been altered, like sections removed from it. People out there, don't do that. You can't go changing it. Mm-hmm. So it's a prescribed form, and it essentially tells you about the wellness of the corporation. It'll tell you who your board of directors are. It will tell you if your budget is going to end the year with a surplus or deficit. It tells you what your condo fees are. It will tell you if there are any anticipated special assessments. It will tell you about the health of your reserve fund study. It will tell you about the type of insurance your condominium corporation has, if there have been any amendments to the corporation. It will tell you if there's any legal cases going on with your corporation that you need to be aware of. It'll tell you about long-term contracts that your corporation may be involved in. So it really gives you a very good perspective on what you're buying into. One of the clauses within the status certificate is a section concerning the reserve fund study that you spoke of as well. A reserve fund study is a required study that must occur at least every 3 years. And out of that comes a document that in broad strokes tells a corporation what the components are of their building, when those components will need to be repaired or replaced, and the amount of money that they will need available to do that. Then it lays out a plan of the amount of money that the condominium corporation needs to be setting aside every month to make sure that when the roof needs to be replaced in 2025 at $500,000, they have that $500,000 in the bank and they don't have to go to owners and ask them for that money. So it's there to protect owners so that when you buy in as an owner, you can feel secure that, you know, if there's a project coming up, all of a sudden as a new owner, you don't have to pay for something that you weren't aware of. The money's been set aside, and when the new roof needs to be done, the money is there and they're not coming to you to ask you for money to replace that roof.
Right, and maybe you can share, what is the condo fee based around? So where's the funds allocated? So if I have a $600 payment, where is that being spent?
So you would look at your budget. So when you get a status certificate, there are a number of documents attached to it as well. They'll attach the declaration, they'll attach the bylaws, the rules, your insurance certificate, your audited financials, copy of any contracts, and you're going to see a copy of the reserve fund study and your budget. Within the budget, your operating budget, it will have all the details of what your condo fees cover. So typically, and not always, it depends on the type of condominiums, but typically it will cover snow removal, landscaping, window washing. If you have a superintendent, the cost of your superintendent, your insurance, legal costs, repair and maintenance. If you have a pool, you know, hiring a lifeguard for the summer for the pool. So you would look at your budget and it will tell you. And so what happens, let's say, to make round numbers off, you have a $500,000 budget for a condominium corporation. What happens is they take that $500,000 number, they take the $500,000, and you go to your declaration. And in the declaration, it will have a schedule of the percent that each owner in the corporation pays of the budget. And you'll see these percents. It'll be, you know, 0.923 for one unit, and another unit might be 0.876. Another one might be, you know, 0.54. Typically, it's based on the size of your unit. And so smaller units will pay less money, a smaller percent of that budget, and larger units will pay more. And so that's how they come up with your condo fee. So it's based on the budget and then your percent of the expenses that is determined in the declaration.
And we talk about what the condo corp is made up, but let's talk a little bit about the board and how important the board is, and what that looks like. If I'm somebody who might have concerns or want to be more involved in the condo corporation and how things are being managed, what is it that the board does?
So the board of directors do exactly that. They direct. So they direct and make decisions on behalf of the owners, very much like if you elect the mayor of your town. They're going to go make the decisions that are required within your town. They will pass new bylaws. They will, you know, execute repairs and maintenance that are required. It's the same concept with a condominium. So the board of directors will make decisions about whether your declaration needs changing, whether you need a new bylaw, whether you need a new rule in place. They'll make recommendations about those. Not to get into it too deeply, but a lot of those then require owner vote. So they will come up with the idea and they will recommend that a new bylaw may be in place, but at the end of the day, it has to be put to vote by owners. They oversee management. They will make decisions about expenses. They will make decisions about what repairs may need to get done in a given year. You have your reserve fund study that is there as a guide, and it may say, hey, your roof needs to be done in 2023. But you have a large leak in 2019 that results in a large insurance claim, and your insurance company says, we're not executing those repairs until your roof is replaced. So all of a sudden in 2019, there's a decision to make, and that decision is that you're going to have to replace the roof in 2019. So the board of directors oversees all of that. They're involved in the conversations, and they make those decisions, and then we'll direct management and say, you need to go out and go to tender and get some quotes here on a roof replacement, for example. They will review the insurance quotes that come in and decide on the insurance coverage. They will go to tender for property management. They'll go and decide what property management firm they want to hire. So the board makes all of those decisions on behalf of the owners. They're elected by owners at an AGM. At every AGM, you should be electing a director, perhaps even more. The new changes in the act that came out November 2017 make it easier for owners to apply to run to be on the board. There is a preliminary AGM package that goes out, and in it the form will say, the AGM will be held on such and such a date. If you wish to present yourself as a candidate, please submit your intent to run along with the disclosure statement by such and such a date, and then your name is included in the package and you can run to be on the board of directors. The other change that has occurred, if you're at all interested in being a director, is there is a new training requirement. The CAO, the Condominium Authority of Ontario, you can go on their website. You just type in CAO, you will see the website, and there's an icon up there for director training. You can go in, and all directors must go through this training process. It's an online training. It takes anywhere from 3 to 6 hours, depending on, how quick you are at going through things. And all directors have to have it within 6 months of being elected, or you become disqualified. And I can tell you that this year we've had 4 directors disqualified because they failed to get it done, and the CAO tracks it and they let you know that you're disqualified because you didn't do your training. So it's pretty important. It's very useful. Every director who has taken it has advised us that they found it informative.
That's a big one, because that wasn't there when I became president of the board in Aurora for what was it, 3 years?
Yeah, and they didn't have that then.
No, they didn't have that then, and it was a big learning curve, understanding. And one of the biggest ones I think that we're facing actually right now is minutes.
Yeah.
Right? How important it is to have all of your conversations as a board with your property manager and make sure they're properly recorded. And why is that important, Anne?
Well, it's important, number one, to show that the board is doing their due diligence. The board is meeting. The board is recording their decisions. I think it's important that for all kinds of reasons, if you have a legal situation down the road, which we've had in a number of corporations, what they will rely on in court is your written documents, your written work. What people can recall as having being done will not hold a lot of water, but the written work will be telling, or the lack thereof. In our situation, the case we're doing with in that corporation is that historically there were a lack of minutes to record what had happened. So the conclusion that people draw is nothing was happening, prior to us taking over the management. So, a lot can be drawn from the lack thereof, and a lot can be drawn by what is covered and written in there.
So if I was a buyer and I was working with a realtor to purchase a condominium, what are some big questions I should be asking, or should we be calling the property manager herself? Maybe sort of walk me through that process if that's the type of buyer that I am today.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's the best question I think there is when you're buying involving condominiums is from the get-go. You know, what should you know when you're a purchaser? So you want to get as much information as you can. You want to get a good real estate agent who knows the property that you're buying into and can give you information. You want to get a good lawyer who is going to pick up the phone and ask questions about that status certificate. More importantly, they're going to share the information that's in that status certificate with you right away before you decide if you are closing on the deal. What we see time and time and time again is when owners buy in, they've been in a month and they, you know, we have to contact them because there's something that they're not doing right, or they, you know, they've neglected to inform us of something. We contact them, we advise them, and they say, oh, I had no knowledge. And we say, it was attached to your status certificate. And they say, what is a status certificate? What are you talking about?
Every day.
Every day we see it. And they were not given a copy of it. Or if they were given a copy of it, it was just in a bunch of documents that the lawyer handed to them, and without an emphasis on the importance of them reviewing it. Almost every time a lawyer does call me about a status certificate, I always say to them, I said, oh, you must be a good lawyer. You're picking up the phone and phoning me. But historically, we hear from very few of them. I think if you have a very, very clean status certificate, that makes sense. But I think when you have these complicated ones, the lawyer should be picking up the phone, calling the property manager on behalf of their client, and asking the questions about the things that are of concern in that status certificate. As a buyer, ask your lawyer who's acting on your behalf, are there any concerns about this property that I should be aware of? You know, is it in good financial situation? Are there any situations that exist there that I should be worried about that are lingering? Legal situations and, you know, and underfunded reserve fund. Those are very good questions to ask. One particular building that we're dealing with, they have aluminum wiring. And what we've discovered over time is that not all the electricians who worked in them over time properly pigtailed and thus connected copper wiring to the aluminum wiring. And a lot of unsuspecting owners bought in there not knowing that this was not done properly and having to incur a lot of costs to have that looked into. So I think when you find out you have a building with aluminum wiring, you want to get an inspection of the unit. I think a lot of owners skip the home inspection when they're buying a condo. I think it's still a good idea. You want to get that done because that's just this added level of comfort. You know, if you're spending $300,000 on a condo, spend a couple $100 or $300 to get a home inspection and have somebody come in and just put your mind at ease a little bit more.
Well, a lot of people skip the that process with the inspection because it's sort of the thought process that everything's covered anyway, so why bother?
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know, and that sort of goes towards the whole amenities conversation that I want to have is clearly the more amenities in a building, underground parking, pools, you know, all the luxuries and things that when people are buying into condominium, they're buying a lifestyle, right?
Correct. Yeah.
It's about, I want to make my life as easy as possible, take care of little as possible. You're gonna find a variety of things that are covered and not. I mean, we learned in our project that, I mean, we owned the hydro, we owned the pipes, and we owned everything. It seemed that that everything was part of this corporation. So a lot of things I think were overlooked when the budget was originally formed. And it's, again, you sometimes don't find out. Now, when you guys ended up coming in and taking over, everything turned around. It took about 2 to 3 years to turn the corporation around. You know, you're buying at $250,000 and then they're selling for under 200 over 3 to 4 years. That's how fast it can depreciate. And then with the right management company, the right board of directors, we're able now to take the other 3 years to finally put it all back together and start to bring the increase of values back up. But it was a very time-consuming, systematic, more knowledge than I probably ever care to use for, but that is the reality, because when you don't have $1 million to go slap a lawsuit on somebody and you're trying to protect your investment, it can take some time, right, to put all that back together. If you don't like your property managers, what are the steps that you need to take if you're having difficulty with a board? I know one of the things that we had looked at implementing was adding additional people to the board, right? Instead of going from a board of 3, going to a board of 5, and why? Maybe you can share.
Well, actually, that ended up happening. When you have a larger corporation and there are a lot of projects going on, a lot of work going on, a larger board makes sense. And that particular corporation had a board of 3, and there was a lot going on. And you want input from more people, so they went to a board of 5, and I think it was a great move. They had tried that previously, I think, under previous management. And the bylaw didn't pass, just simply they didn't have enough people show up. But what should have been done is they should have simply adjourned the meeting, recalled it, and had it passed, which is what we ended up doing. It didn't get passed at the first meeting, but you just adjourn. You go out, you get your proxies, and you call back the AGM, and you come back with your proxies, and you get the bylaw passed to increase your board members from 3 to 5, which I really was in the best interest of everybody, but more importantly, all these board members. It was a lot of work, and to just put that down on 3 people, that's a lot. And I think with 5, you get more perspective, and as long as you all work well together, which is what you have at that corporation, I think it's a really good idea.
And I think the biggest thing we want to talk about is the financial statements, right? So we talk about having audited financial statements. Maybe talk a little bit about the importance of that auditor and who elects the auditor, and right?
Sure. So audited financial statements have to be done yearly on any corporations that have, 26 units and under, you don't have to have an audit. Above that, you have to have a yearly audit. The auditor is someone who is appointed by the owners at the AGM. There are some very set things that occur at an AGM, as I reviewed with you when I told you the importance of an AGM. You have to approve, the owners get to approve the minutes from the previous year. The owners get to elect their directors, and the owners get to appoint their auditor. The auditor is responsible to the owners. They're not responsible to the directors. The auditor is going to tell you if your manager and your directors are properly managing the corporation from a financial perspective. They're going to tell you if things are being spent the way they should, if the funds are going where they're supposed to go. They're going to tell you if reserve fund monies have been spent on reserve fund projects. So they are there as a reassurance to owners that everything's on the up and up from a financial perspective at the management level.
Yeah, that's a big one, because we went through quite a bit of experience, right? Going through all of the financials and trying to understand where all the funds were allocated, where the money was spent. We did have a couple of insurance claims, how did that play into effect with the statements? So, it's condominiums are great. And I have to say that most Ontario condominium corporations are run pretty well. Because of their governance, right? Because of all the regulations in place to protect. So this, again, it's not to scare people. It's just to have eyes wide open. How do you get to be part of the board? How is the corporation being run? What things should I be looking for when making my first purchase? Because they can be one of the best places to live as well, right? I mean, it's like I said, nothing goes wrong until it goes wrong. And that seems to be the case just about anything that you're going to buy, or even an investment that you're going, whether it's a mutual fund or anything, right? We typically don't look at something until, it goes wrong. So I want to thank you very much. I know you've got such an amazing amount of experience, and one of the most thorough, and I'm sure if I was to ask just about any property manager, there's probably nobody that knows as much as you do. And again, very passionate about it, because when you see things not being done correctly, you're there to help anybody, regardless of whether you're part of it or you're not part of it. And I want to thank you for that. In your case, you end up being a very integral part of it, which is why I asked you to speak today, because I don't think that we could have done it without you. So thank you again for your time. But if somebody was looking for an incredible property manager for their corporation. You guys have a ton of experience, and you guys are located in Brockville, right? And what's the best way to connect with you if somebody was looking at bringing on a new property management company for their condominium corporation?
Okay, first I want to thank you, but there are a lot of good managers out there.
There's lots. You're just my favorite.
A lot of great managers out there. Some of them are some really good friends. But if anybody wanted to get in touch with us, we do cover Eastern Ontario. 613-918-0145 on my extension 501, and would be happy to speak with them.
Wonderful. And what's some good resources for people if they want to get some additional information in terms of how corporations, do you have any sites that you would recommend to people?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the Condominium Authority of Ontario is a great site. You go there and there's a lot of information, and it lists resources for owners, on where to look and what to look at. The Condominium Act itself is online, and you can look at that and read it as well and become an informed owner, purchaser. Speak to people in the field, speak to realtors, speak to people who already live in a condominium. Do your research. It's well worth it. It can be a wonderful place to live. It's a wonderful community for a lot of people. It becomes, all the owners in the building become a warm community. They take care of each other, and it can be a really wonderful experience.
It is. And one of the other things is when I had initially been introduced to you from that side of things, you said go to different meetings around Ottawa, right? So
conferences, yes.
Yeah, so how do you find out?
Okay, so there's the Canadian Condominium Institute. They call it CCI, and there's one for Eastern Ontario. You can, again, go online. They have courses for directors and owners, conferences. There's director training courses that they have that are just absolutely wonderful, and are a great resource for directors and owners or people who are looking into buying, and they can give you all kinds of information. They are definitely there to help people who are buying in, or our directors or our owners. They have a tremendous amount of resources and information to share.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for all of your time today. And it's been extremely informative, and I can't wait to talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Kelly.
All right. Take care. Say hi to Dean.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye.